Good morning, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar, Improving Government Performance, a conversation with Max Williams. We will be talking about ways to increase transparency, accountability, decision-making, and performance outcomes through the use of data. My name is Aaron Howard, and I'll be your moderator today. I'm the President and Chief Technology Officer of Mass Ingenuity. We specialize in state government performance. Mass Ingenuity is honored to have worked with over 80 agencies in many domains, including corrections, public health, human services, voc rehab, and many, many more. I'm very pleased that Max Williams is joining us today about this important topic of improving government performance, a subject that I know is very near and dear to the mission you are all devoted to every day. Welcome, Max. Please take a moment to introduce yourself before we dive into our topics today.
Great. Thanks, Aaron, and thanks everyone for being here. And I want to thank Mass Ingenuity for inviting me to participate. Just as a brief background, I'm an attorney by training. I served 3 terms in the Oregon Legislature where I chaired the Judiciary Committee. I'm the former director of the Oregon Department of Corrections, which I led in Oregon for 8 years. And then most recently, I was the CEO and president of the Oregon Community Foundation, and I did that job for about 11 years as the state's largest philanthropy. My professional career has really been focused on trying to help build systems that can transform communities and change lives, working very closely with state government. And most recently, I was on Oregon's new governor, Kotek's transition team as she took her office just about a year ago.
Thank you, Max, and again, welcome. Well, I think it's time for us to get started. As we proceed, please put your questions in the chat. We will make every effort to answer them, time permitting, today. If not, of course, we will answer them via email. Our first topic area is exploring the inherent challenges of leaders and what they encounter in accomplishing their agency's mission, as well as the community well-being that they're, of course, responsible for. We all know that state government leaders and employees are deeply committed to their roles and their agency's mission. As a result, they make sacrifices every day, yet they face numerous challenges accomplishing their agency's mission to improve community well-being. So Max, one of the questions is, what are some of the examples of the inherent challenges leaders and employees face in accomplishing their agency's mission, as well as to improve the well-being of the community at large?
Well, we could spend the whole 30 minutes we have probably cataloging challenges, and even then we wouldn't have enough time. I do want to say, however, just first that I appreciated your comment. I believe that people who work in and serve in state government certainly aren't doing it to get rich. They do it because they're really committed to this mission of transforming the lives and the communities where we live and the people that we serve. But if I was thinking about challenges, I think I'd highlight 3 very specifically. First, I guess I'd say what you do is complex, and many people, even those that should, I think, don't fully understand the complexity of the work. We are tasked in the roles that we play in state government of solving some of society's most wicked problems, and what we see facing communities and across very complex systems, and trying to do so in a way that has real impact on the lives of the people that we're serving. So being clear about our mission and messaging, I think, is really important, and finding ways to help those that need to understand those complexities is one of the great challenges of the task we have. The second I'd say is keeping focus. All of us who have been in state government or led agencies or serve in certain parts of agencies understand that we are part of a larger enterprise. And we may have our mission and our focus, but as part of a larger enterprise of state government, there are lots of other people who have objectives for our work, whether it's governors or legislators or statewide administrators. And we can't ignore those pressures, and yet those are sometimes not core to our mission. And so there's this constant balance of distraction between those issues and the core work that we do. And so keeping focus, I think, is such a really critical responsibility of those leading issues. I can tell you about years I spent on state data center consolidation when I was running corrections that had nothing to do with the day-to-day operations of corrections. So finding that balance between those enterprise issues and the focus is another really big challenge, I think. And then third is people. Recently, as I said, I helped on the transition team for Governor Kotek, And one of the things we heard from every single agency was the challenge associated right now with workforce issues in government. And I think that's true across a lot of things. But the people that we work with and the people that we need to hire and the people that we need to retain, they're really, these are people who understand these issues. And we work in a spirit of sort of mass specialization in the way that we do this work. It's not mass production, as so often people think, because so often the issues we're working on are very, very specific to the people that we're dealing with. And these are big challenges, I think, as we deal with this issue moving forward with this new workforce and the new environments that we're asking them to interact with. And as I said, to an agency, the people issue was probably the #1 issue that came up consistently across all domains.
You know, Max, we're going to talk more about the workforce in a little bit, but maybe just take a little bit more time. The change in the workforce, of course, affects agencies different depending on what they do, but maybe spend just a couple more minutes on what you're seeing as the impact in maybe human services or other large agencies where this is really pretty dramatic.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, you know, certainly a combination of issues, right? We have an intergenerational workforce and the transition out of people who have, in many cases, worked their whole careers in this space. At the same time, we've all lived through COVID, and I think every one of us can just talk probably very detailed about the impact that that had on workforce, both on how we did our work, on the stresses that the workforce actually experienced. And then on the expectations of the newer workforce about their involvement in being engaged in the work and in understanding the focus and the mission of the organization. So I think all of those things really are in play as we think about the workforce challenges. And, you know, as you pointed out, again, lots of different domains within state government and different requirements of workforce, whether you're a 24/7 operation or whether you're a Monday through Friday, you know, sort of 8 to 5 operation. But really, much of the challenges are very much the same as with respect to hiring and retention and engagement.
Indeed, thank you. You know, what we found in the work we're doing on performance management is that the question of how to, in fact, deploy with a hybrid workforce comes up as not only a requirement, something that people want us to put as a very high priority as part of the change management and deployment. Right. So thank you on that.
And it has, I just would say, I think it has truly changed how we think about change management. You know, the old models of change management have to adapt to this different workforce environment that we're experiencing.
Absolutely, absolutely. The second area of exploration is exploring the transformative nature or role of data, you know, in elevating agency performance. At the same time, you know, really focusing on the quality of life for the agency as well as, of course, the customers. So fortunately, there's an ever-increasing emphasis on using data to do it more effectively and to use it to achieve, you know, greater transparency, accountability, etc. At the same time, many state agencies are running to catch up to fully integrate the concepts of people, process, and technology. So please take some time and talk about how you perceive the need for data tools and the capabilities to elevate agency performance to fulfill their mission. And examples would be great because this is a very extensive and hot topic, as we know.
Yeah, sure. You know, I'll tell a story. I'm a big fan of data and using data for decision making and have been for years. I remember just a budget cutting session I was in when I was running corrections, and one of the recommendations from a well-intentioned legislator was that I could, you know, reduce my budget by getting rid of my data and research team. And I joked with him in the moment that, you know, that would be akin to being in the middle of a storm on a boat, and the first thing we threw overboard to lighten the load was the compass. And really, I feel that way about data. I think if we're going to steer our work and focus on the outcomes and our mission, we need solid data to be able to tell us where we're at. And, you know, we often focus on the end measures, but so much of that data is driven by sort of those early leading indicators that tell us whether we're going to be on track or not. So how that system, how whatever data system you're using maps and tracks those leading indicators is so critical to identifying problems and using that to really problem solve. And, you know, again, I'll put it in the context of my experience at corrections, which continues to struggle with hiring and staffing issues, as I'm sure is true across a number of different agencies and domains. But if you're waiting to get the end number about how short you are on hiring today, and you didn't look 16 months ahead to see who was in the potential hiring pipeline and whether or not you were getting the sufficient number of potential applicants in the front door at that process before they actually could start performing their responsibility. If you only focused on that last indicator, you are going to be really in big trouble. We could predict, and we should be able to predict months ahead of time whether we're going to have a staffing shortfall based on what's going through that pipeline on hiring and training and hitting those benchmarks. And so it's not just about that final indicator measure that you need to likely report on across the organization. It's about those early components that are telling us where our problems are, where the bottlenecks are, and where we need to actually engage staff to lean in to help us solve them before we get to that bad outcome at the end of that final reporting number. So that's just one example, and you know, we could talk about a myriad of those. You know, the same, I could, you know, use several other examples within corrections. You know, recidivism is this big number that a lot of things hinge off of. But what we know that affects recidivism are all sorts of other indicators and systems that we have to be watching along the way and tracking that information in a way that's going to tell us whether we are going to be on track or off track when we finally, you know, roll that next number over for that bigger key performance measure.
You know, Max, you're making me think of something else that's related, but a little bit different. We've noticed across the states that oftentimes KPIs, KPMs, OKRs get dictated, if you will, and sometimes actually changed in terms of what system is going to be used. To what extent have you had experience where, you know, there was kind of a coming down from the top need to answer questions about KPMs, as to say, but it may or may not have had direct application to actually running the agency?
Well, I mean, I think that's, you know, that's always the challenge, which I think bodes for, you know, strong engagement all the way across the development of those KPIs or OKRs. You know, again, people need to measure things for a whole lot of reasons, and we all end up working with partners either through, you know, government, you know, in the governor's office for leadership related reasons, or with the legislature about things that they want to measure. And they've got their reasons for that. And I think we need to talk through those and help them understand what those things are in respect to helping us better understand our outcomes and what we're trying to accomplish as an agency. At the same time, I would say that it's really important for us to understand what we need with respect to our core mission to measure and what really matters. And again, backing those out through those early systems so that we can problem solve and identify, you know, what spins up to those numbers early.
Indeed. You know, from our experience with performance management, we've noticed that it's fairly easy to take the requirements, they may be OKRs or KPIs or KPMs, to take those requirements and translate them into often the actual outcome measures that substantiate the success of the agency. And so it's nice because instead of it being two systems, it slowly becomes one system of managing. Right. That's a lot easier from our experience on the employees in general, and also oftentimes the leaders. Any thoughts about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, look, people need to understand why we're measuring what we're measuring, right? You know, just fundamentally. And I think too often you can kind of sit at the ivory tower level and come up with those. And then the piece that we often fall down on is communicating why those measures actually matter to the overall mission. You know, whether they're measures about tracking budget and expenditure, or outcomes for individuals within a program, or even, you know, things as simple for, you know, those who are in the direct service line of work, you know, responsiveness on call times, or, you know, turnaround times on, you know, submissions of applications. I mean, all of those issues, to help someone understand why tracking that matters, because a lot of that goes to ultimately establishing the confidence level in the agency or in the organization, and being able to sort of connect that confidence level to the work that an agency does. A government agency has to rely on trust from folks at a couple of different levels. You need your governor's office or your administration to trust the work that you're doing. You need the public to trust the work that you're doing, and you need the legislature to trust the work that you're doing, for all of those things to work appropriately. And oftentimes we're measuring the things that we're measuring because we are trying to demonstrate our competency, or in places that we're short of achieving our objectives, we're trying to identify where those shortfalls are so we can intervene and improve that competency, so we can build that deeper trust and deliver the necessary transformative services to the people and community that we're supposed to be serving. And I think it's about aligning that through line with why are we measuring what we're measuring. And we've all been part of organizations where we look at a report and there are 3 things that we care about and 27 measures that we don't care about, that we're still either reporting on because they got built in early on, or because somebody thought it was a good idea, but nobody actually knows what to do with them. And it's one of the reasons, a process of going through those and saying, why do we measure that? What are we asking people to actually take their time to track or record? And what is this telling us about whether or not we're actually achieving the organizational mission, is such an important part of this process.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And it leads directly to our third and final area, which is really understanding best practices that empower agencies to operate effectively, and to tie that directly to the human-centric necessities and approach that we all need to have in what we do every day and for how we serve our customers. Every state agency strives to improve their operational and strategic effectiveness, but they do it while trying to maintain, and especially now, a human-centric approach. So Max, in your experience, what are the best practices and tools that have proven effective in empowering agencies to operate effectively, but at the same time maintaining that human touch, that human centricity, if you will? This is an area that, of course, is very broad. We could go on for 30 minutes on this one, but I think touching on it is really important because it really ties together the need to have data, to have performance, but remember that it's always people, process, and technology.
Yeah, and embedded in your question is probably also the answer, right? And we've talked a little bit about this. I mean, and I've been in the role of sitting both in the legislature, thinking about how we as a legislature would measure outcomes and performance of agencies, and the things that we might want to see as a legislature. To determine whether or not we were seeing the outcomes that we wanted. I've also been at it at the agency director level and saying, well, what are the things that I would need to look at on a regular basis to help me demonstrate that the agency is performing in the way that we want to perform across whatever our key domains are. And I think the piece that is often not reflected in that high level thinking is what that actually looks like on the ground for staff who are performing those responsibilities. If I had a best practice that I wish I could say I was perfect at, and I wasn't, but one that I often tried to instill in the work that I did, was that I really felt like I wanted to achieve an organizational development where no matter where I was across the organization in any part of the state, I could ask an employee, regardless of their position or role in the agency, what the mission of the agency was in a way that they could communicate it back to me with comprehension of our overall mission, that they were aligned with the mission of the organization. And then equally important, understanding what the mission of the organization was, they could communicate to me the job that they do in service to that mission. In other words, how are they contributing to the outcome of that mission? And I think too frequently, we don't always make that connection for staff. We hire somebody to do a particular task, whether it's in the finance and accounting side or in the maintenance, side or some other thing that might not be in anybody's mind core to the mission because they're not providing the direct service, or they're not working directly with the client, or they're not engaged in whatever the key work of an agency is. And yet what we all know is without people doing all of those roles well, the organization actually can't move forward and make the progress that it needs to make. And so, whether you're, a finance person or an analyst or someone who's working in maintenance, you need to have an understanding of why your role is actually essential to the organization's success. And I think we forget about that. And then we focus on these very, narrow measures that are only measuring the very specific thing. And we don't tie that back to the work that other people are doing and why it's essential. And finance is an easy one to point to. It's the easiest way for an organization to lose favor with all the people who need to be supporting its mission externally. If it looks like the finances, if you can't answer questions about your budget, you're in serious trouble, right? So, I mean, it is absolutely critical that those timelines are hit and those functions are done, and you're closing out months, and you're doing your part as the enterprise of state government to provide that information to policymakers and other state leaders. And so it's a critical function, but it might not have anything to do with supervising adults in custody, right? Or the impact of adults in custody leaving the system less likely to commit a crime, less likely to recidivate. So those are just examples, but I do think it's one of the places we fall down. And I think it's very challenging to do transformational change management if you're only focusing on a narrow part of the organization. I mean, you've got to be able to make that through line for every person in every role in the organization, tied to mission and then tied to the overall outcome.
Indeed, yeah, thank you so much. We are wanting to get to questions, but I remember the other day when we were having coffee, you shared an anecdote, I guess it was, of an experience where you asked somebody what they did for a living, and it was a very, very powerful answer. Do you mind sharing that again?
Well, I mean, I think we've all heard the story. It's one of my favorite stories, and this was one of the things that motivated me to want to be able to do this. But we've all heard the story of the news reporters who were touring NASA before the moon launch, and one of them asked a guy who was, pushing a broom in one of the big hangars what his job was, and he responded, putting a man on the moon. And I've always sort of hoped that we could strive for that same thing in any organization that I ran. That the mission of anybody inside the department was able to sort of see their through line directly to the fundamental mission of the organization. And I was fortunate to have people who really did understand that at various places and organizations within the agency that I led. And I will also just admit, like all of us, that it was sometimes hard to get people to see that connection in the work they do. And that's a lot about leadership. And, that tone at the top is a really important piece. But, we all know that most organizations, it's the line management that sets the tone for most people. So ensuring that we've got that relationship and that understanding of that connection at that frontline management level within our organizations is where I think that rubber really hits the road. And to do that effectively, everybody's got to be pulled into this conversation about transition and change management. And the only way you can really do that is with data that really tells you what are the key processes within your organization, how are they being measured, close enough that you can see where your roadblocks are or your bottlenecks are, so you can problem solve and address those. And to do that, you've got to actually be talking to the people on the ground who can tell you this. And I've had that experience on multiple times, whether I was dealing with a pharmacy or with a transport folk or whoever, where I would say, man, I can't understand why this is. And they would give me the honest answer and say, well, the problem is that, we do this ordering at the first of the month, and by the end of the month, and all of a sudden a problem that I couldn't get my head around, somebody who's dealing with it daily had completely clarified for me. And this is, again, part of why these systems have to engage employees virtually at every level, and to have them feel like they're both engaged in the solutions and in the recommendations to how to help the agency achieve its objectives.
Yeah, thank you, Max. Thanks for telling the story, and also for bringing up where problem solving belongs, which is, of course, as close as possible to the work. It's a very important concept. Well, we have some time for questions, so let's see what we have. Let's see, we've got some questions.
Yes, Aaron and Max, we do have a few questions. The first one is, can you provide any tips on getting an agency's metrics moved from lagging or outcome measures to leading indicators?
Well, a great question. So thank you very much for it. Max, I'm going to hand it to you because from our perspective, we actually differentiate between leading and lagging, but we do it through that process called fundamentals. But why don't you take that question and provide some insights, please?
Yeah, I know we don't have a lot of time, so I'll be brief. I think in my mind, the process starts, and there are a lot of ways to do this, but the process starts at looking on the lagging indicator or that outcome performance measure, and then backing out the elements that actually drive that, and doing a little bit of a flip of the pyramid and saying, okay, if this is where we want to be at the end of the budget cycle or at the end of the biennium, what do we need to be watching today that's going to tell us that we're either going to hit that number or we're not going to hit that number? I mean, it's each indicator based on the issue or the domain is going to be specific, but I think the trick is to unpack what rolls up into that number and then ask yourself just the fundamental question: what do I need to know about getting that number now? If it's all like almost any process. If these pieces of the pipeline have to ultimately get here to get that, then what are those pieces and what do I have to measure today? And then actually selling that as the measure to actually talk about. And when you see that measure not hitting whatever its target would be as it rolls up, that's the problem solving component. That's where we say, wow, if we're lagging here, we know we're never going to get there. What's causing us not to be able to get this thing addressed now? And how do we problem solve around that early as opposed to wait until the end of the cycle to see that the number isn't doing what we need it to do? Aaron, you probably have more specific offers.
I think you covered it great, and I want to make sure that we allow for at least one more question. Thank you, Max. Do we have any other questions?
We do indeed. How can we prevent future administrations, regardless of their political party, from discontinuing the system simply because it was implemented by a prior administration?
I wish I had that answer. If I had that answer, I'd have a different job maybe.
Yes, you would.
I would say we are because of its government, and we live in a democracy. We are going to be subject to the political winds of change as we do this work. There's no alternative around that. I think the key, as much as possible, is, and it often falls to sort of what I refer to as the more permanent entrenched agency leaders that aren't going to flip with changes of administration, to hold that core focus of agency mission and measurement and success. And sometimes you might have to repackage it or rebrand it or whatever you need to call it to not have it be the target of somebody else's political intentions. But I do think it's absolutely key to sort of try to maintain and hold on to that. And I will say that almost everybody who takes one of these jobs, whether they're a political appointee or they've been elected, they really do want the right thing. And so being able to actually translate what you're currently measuring, what you're focused on, and what the outcomes that you're looking for are, if you can make that case effectively and demonstrate its effectiveness, you've got a longer chance or a better chance of holding on to it. That's what I would say. But I wish I could wave the magic wand and say it'll go away. I just think we have to be realists and pragmatists about the political winds and then figure out how to adapt.
Absolutely. In many respects, we should be thankful for those political winds in general, because they actually do provide opportunity to always advance forward. Well, our time is almost up today. and this has been great. Max, before I close out, any closing thoughts about what we're talking about today?
Just keep at it. You know, this is hard work. You do hard work. As I said in the beginning, it's very complex, and most people don't understand the complexity. Don't give up. And just as one, you know, long-serving public servant to a bunch of others, thank you for what you do, and keep the faith.
Thanks, Max. Well, thank you all for joining our webinar today. We will make sure that we answer the questions via email. And if you have a chance, be sure and visit our website, massingenuity.com. Thank you all. Thank you, Max.
Thank you.